Me and Mrs. Jones.
Mr. Jones was the fourth album I did with Trillion International, and that's the one that struck and became #1 across the whole world. It was a true song. It hit within a lot of homes.
Because I was able to spend time with Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, all the great leaders.
No one ever messed with Billy Paul again after this. They thought the smooth jazz crooner would be their perfect controllable star.
And Charlie Parker discovered me. I turned professional at 16. I sang with Charlie Parker at 16. I sang with John Coltrane because I'm basically a jazz singer.
They had no idea they were dealing with a Philadelphia street survivor who'd learned survival from legends like Charlie Parker, a man who'd rather burn his career down than bow to anyone.
It took me a while to make that adjustment to come from nobody knowing me and then just being a star, a huge star.
By the time executives realized their fatal mistake, Paul had already declared war on the industry that created him. And what happened next would make him the most feared man in soul music history. So, let's get into it. Long before Me and Mrs. Jones made him a household name, Paul Williams was cutting his teeth in the roughest neighborhoods of North Philadelphia. Born December 1st, 1934, he grew up in an era where black musicians had to be twice as talented and 3 times as tough to survive in the music business.
I did my first 45 record when I was going to Simon Gratz High School. I associated with Sammy Davis. He did a lot for me. Him and Frank Sinatra made sure I got on the Mike Douglas show.
But it wasn't just his musical education that shaped Billy Paul. The streets of Philadelphia in the 1940s and 50s were unforgiving. Jazz clubs were often controlled by dangerous elements, and young musicians had to learn how to navigate not just the music, but the violence that came with the territory. Paul learned early that in these establishments, weakness was exploited and strength was respected. The stories whispered in Philly's music circles painted a different picture of Billy Paul than the smooth crooner the world would come to know. Those who knew him from the early days remember a young man who could handle himself in any situation. There were rumors of confrontations in dimly lit clubs, of Paul standing his ground when older, more established musicians tried to intimidate the newcomer.
Well, my aunt played with a group called Tanny Graham. Her name was Camille Howard. And she used to always stay in Philly across the street at my aunt's house.
His stint with Charlie Parker wasn't just about music. It was a masterclass in surviving the brutal politics of the jazz world. Parker, known for his own volatile temperament and street credentials, saw something in the young Philadelphia singer that went beyond talent. He recognized a kindred spirit who understood that in this business, you either commanded respect or you got eaten alive. The jazz scene was notoriously cutthroat, with established musicians often viewing newcomers as threats to be eliminated rather than talents to be nurtured. When Billy Paul joined Harold Melvin's Blue Notes, even briefly, the stories grew darker. The Blue Notes weren't just a vocal group, they were a tight-knit organization that demanded absolute loyalty. Paul's departure wasn't the amicable, creative differences story that would later be told to the press. Those close to the situation whispered about heated confrontations, about Paul refusing to be controlled or manipulated.
It took me a while to make that adjustment to come from nobody knowing me and then just being a star, a huge star. I've always wanted to be a regular person.
The young singer had made it clear that he wouldn't be anyone's puppet, wouldn't be pushed around or told what to do. This wasn't just artistic integrity. This was a man drawing a line in the sand that no one would ever cross again. His reputation for being uncompromising began to spread through Philadelphia's music community like wildfire. By the time Kenny Gamble discovered him singing at the Sahara Club, Billy Paul had already established himself as someone you didn't mess with. His reputation preceded him through Philadelphia's tight-knit music community. He was talented, yes, but he was also dangerous in ways that went far beyond his voice. Club owners knew he delivered crowds, but they also knew he wouldn't tolerate disrespect from anyone, regardless of their position or power. When Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff signed Billy Paul to Philadelphia International Records, they thought they were getting a cooperative jazz singer who would follow their artistic direction without question. They couldn't have been more wrong. The sophisticated jazz vocalist they'd witnessed at the Sahara Club came with a reputation that preceded him through every studio and boardroom in Philadelphia. From the very beginning, Paul made it clear that he wasn't like their other artists. While singers like the OJs and Harold Melvin's Blue Notes were content to let Gamble and Huff control their artistic destiny, Billy Paul had his own ideas about what his music should sound like. He'd spent years developing his craft in environments where creative compromise meant artistic death.
I think I primarily would describe myself as just a singer that's dealing with the time and what's relevant and what's happening now. But Mrs. Jones is something that been happening for centuries and centuries.
The tension started immediately during the recording of 360 Degrees of Billy Paul. Studio musicians and engineers would later tell stories about the singer's explosive temper when things weren't going his way. Paul had specific ideas about arrangements, about the feel of the music, and he wasn't shy about expressing his displeasure when his vision wasn't being realized. His background in jazz had taught him that every note mattered. Every arrangement choice could make or break a song's emotional impact. But it was the recording of Me and Mrs. Jones that first revealed the full extent of Paul's confrontational nature. According to studio insiders, Paul initially refused to record the song the way Gamble and Huff wanted it performed. He thought the tempo was wrong, the arrangement too commercial, the whole approach beneath his artistic standards. This wasn't just professional disagreement. This was a fundamental clash of artistic philosophies. The confrontation that followed became legendary in Philadelphia International's offices. Paul allegedly slammed his hand on the studio console and told the producers that if they wanted a performing monkey, they should find someone else. He wasn't going to compromise his artistic integrity for a cheap pop hit. The room fell silent as everyone realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. An artist directly challenging the most powerful producers in Philadelphia.
Well, if I can say so, War of the Gods. Not putting Mrs. Jones down, but that was to me, that was the best album I've ever done. It's my favorite album. Of all the albums that I've done, that's my favorite.
Mine too.
Because the truth was there.
What happened next showed exactly why Kenny Gamble would later call Billy Paul a madman, but not for the reasons most people assumed. Paul's explosion wasn't just about artistic differences, it was about respect. He'd grown up fighting for every opportunity, and he wasn't about to let anyone, not even the most powerful producers in Philadelphia, treat him like he was expendable. The standoff lasted for hours. Other artists might have backed down, afraid of losing their record deal. But Billy Paul had something that Gamble and Huff recognized. He was genuinely dangerous, not just to their business, but to their reputation. If word got out that their star artist was publicly challenging their authority, it could undermine their entire operation. Paul had connections throughout the industry, relationships that could make or break careers. Finally, a compromise was reached. Paul would record Me and Mrs. Jones, but only if certain changes were made to accommodate his artistic vision. The slower tempo, the more intimate arrangement. These weren't Gamble and Huff's original ideas. They were concessions to keep Billy Paul from walking away and potentially taking other artists with him. The song became a massive hit, reaching #1 and earning Paul a Grammy. But industry insiders knew the real story. Billy Paul had faced down two of the most powerful men in the music business and won. His victory sent shockwaves through the industry, proving that artists could still have power if they were willing to risk everything to maintain it. After the success of Me and Mrs. Jones, Billy Paul had earned something more valuable than money or fame. He had earned fear. Record executives across the industry knew that this wasn't an artist who could be easily controlled or manipulated. But what came next would cement his reputation as someone who was truly dangerous to cross, a man willing to sacrifice everything for his principles. The decision to release Am I Black Enough for You? As the follow-up single wasn't just an artistic choice, it was a declaration of war against the industry's expectations of black artists. While other singers were content to play it safe with crossover-friendly material, Billy Paul was about to show the world exactly how far he was willing to go to maintain his artistic independence. The recording sessions for the song were reportedly explosive. Paul knew that releasing Am I Black Enough for You would effectively end his crossover appeal and potentially destroy his commercial viability. But he also knew something that terrified the executives at Philadelphia International. He didn't care. This wasn't about money or chart positions. This was about respect and artistic integrity, concepts that the industry had tried to strip away from black artists for decades. Paul had grown up in an era where black artists were expected to be grateful for whatever scraps the white-dominated industry threw their way. He'd seen talented musicians broken and discarded when they tried to assert their independence. The message was always clear: stay in your lane, don't rock the boat, and maybe you'll be allowed to succeed within carefully defined boundaries. But Billy Paul was different. He'd already proven he could succeed on his own terms with Me and Mrs. Jones. More importantly, he'd proven he was willing to walk away from success if it meant compromising his principles. This wasn't just artistic rebellion. This was a fundamental challenge to the power structure that controlled black music. The confrontations with Gamble and Huff became more intense. According to studio insiders, Paul made it clear that he would record Am I Black Enough for You with or without their support. If they tried to stop him, he would take the song to another label. If they tried to sabotage his career, he would make sure the entire industry knew about Philadelphia International's business practices. His connections to civil rights leaders gave his threats additional weight. This wasn't just a disgruntled artist. This was someone with powerful allies outside the music industry. Kenny Gamble later called Billy Paul a madman in interviews, but those close to the situation knew this wasn't about mental instability. This was about a man who understood power and wasn't afraid to use it. Paul had cultivated relationships throughout the industry, had dirt on powerful executives, and wasn't afraid to use that information if pushed too far. His reputation for being unpredictable made him dangerous in ways that went beyond simple artistic disagreements.
I've always wanted to be a regular person because I figured I can be a star on stage, but when I come off stage, my name is Paul Williams. My grandmother told me, it's not important to be important. Now leave with this, but it's important to be nice.
The release of Am I Black Enough for You sent shockwaves through the music business. Radio stations refused to play it. Retail stores wouldn't stock it, and industry executives privately blacklisted Paul from future crossover opportunities. But Paul had made his point. He would rather destroy his own career than let anyone else control it. The song became a rallying cry for other artists who were tired of industry manipulation and control. The message was clear to everyone in the industry. Billy Paul was untouchable. Not because he was protected by powerful friends, but because he was genuinely dangerous to anyone who tried to manipulate or control him. He'd rather burn everything down than submit to industry pressure. This reputation spread throughout the music business, making him both feared and respected in equal measure. Billy Paul's willingness to sacrifice commercial success for artistic integrity had established him as one of the most feared figures in the music industry. But that fearsome reputation came with a price that would follow him for the rest of his career. The industry had long memories, and crossing powerful executives came with consequences that extended far beyond individual songs or albums. By 1975, the industry's retaliation against Paul was in full swing. Radio programmers who had once fought to get early access to his records now refused to return phone calls from his management. Record executives who had courted him after Me and Mrs. Jones suddenly claimed not to know who he was. Distribution deals dried up, promotional budgets disappeared, and magazine coverage became increasingly rare. But Paul had anticipated this response. His years growing up in North Philadelphia had taught him that power always came with a target on your back. The same reputation that protected him from direct confrontation also made him a marked man in an industry that valued compliance above all else. He'd made himself too dangerous to control, but also too dangerous to openly support. The stories from this period reveal a man who had become increasingly isolated, but more dangerous than ever. Studio musicians spoke in whispers about Paul's explosive outbursts when producers tried to water down his material. Engineers talked about sessions where Paul would stop recording mid-song if he felt the arrangement wasn't respecting his artistic vision. His perfectionism became legendary, but so did his unwillingness to compromise even the smallest detail. Paul's associations with civil rights leaders only added to his dangerous reputation. In an era where the FBI was actively monitoring black activists, Paul's connections to Malcolm X and Martin Luther King made him a person of interest to law enforcement agencies. Industry executives knew that associating with Paul could bring unwanted government attention to their businesses. His political consciousness wasn't just artistic expression. It was seen as a genuine threat to the established order. The substance abuse issues that would later surface weren't just about personal demons. They were about the incredible pressure of maintaining a reputation built on never backing down. Paul had painted himself into a corner where any sign of weakness could be exploited by his enemies in the industry. The drugs and alcohol became a way to cope with the isolation that came with being too powerful for anyone to safely approach. But even during his darkest periods, no one dared to openly challenge Billy Paul. The stories of his confrontations had become legendary in industry circles. Executives who had crossed him found themselves facing mysterious problems. Radio promotion suddenly drying up, distribution deals falling through, negative stories appearing in trade publications. Paul had learned to weaponize his reputation without ever having to make direct threats. The royalty battle that would eventually earn him $500,000 in court was just the latest example of Paul's willingness to fight dirty when necessary. Rather than quietly accepting being cheated out of his earnings, like so many other artists, Paul went to war against Philadelphia International Records with a ferocity that shocked even his own lawyers. He brought decades of accumulated grievances and insider knowledge to the courtroom. His reputation for being untouchable had evolved into something more complex. He was simultaneously the most respected and most feared artist in the Philadelphia music scene. Young musicians studied his career not just for musical inspiration, but as a blueprint for maintaining independence in a system designed to crush individual will. By the time Billy Paul died in 2016, his reputation as the most dangerous man in soul music had become the stuff of legend. Industry veterans would still lower their voices when talking about him, even decades after his commercial peak had passed. His influence extended far beyond his recorded music. He had fundamentally changed how artists could relate to the power structure of the music industry. The lawsuit against Gamble and Huff wasn't just about money. It was about proving that Billy Paul could still destroy anyone who crossed him, even in his final years. The swift victory in court, with the jury deliberating for less than an hour, sent a clear message. Paul's reputation for being untouchable was well-deserved. The industry watched in amazement as a 70-year-old man brought down some of the most powerful figures in soul music. Even in his later years, when health issues and age had slowed him down, industry insiders knew better than to underestimate Billy Paul. His wife Blanche's quote after the court victory revealed the continued power of his reputation. "This is just the beginning of G&H's worst nightmare. The avalanche cometh." The threat wasn't just about legal action. It was about the possibility that other artists would be inspired to challenge the system that had exploited them for decades. The documentary, Am I Black Enough for You?, showed a man who had never lost his edge. never stopped being dangerous to those who might try to exploit him. Director Göran Olsen captured something that many interviewers had missed. Paul wasn't just reflecting on past battles. He was still fighting them. His eyes still held the fire that had made him legendary in Philadelphia's music circles. Young artists today study Billy Paul not just for his musical innovations, but for his blueprint on how to maintain independence in an industry designed to crush individual will. His story became a masterclass in using reputation and fear as weapons against institutional power. Hip-hop artists, in particular, embraced his model of being too dangerous to control, too unpredictable to manipulate. The music industry learned valuable lessons from Billy Paul's career. They learned that some artists were simply too dangerous to cross, too volatile to control, too willing to destroy themselves rather than submit to manipulation. Paul had shown that sometimes the only way to win against a rigged system was to be more ruthless than the system itself. His legacy influenced contract negotiations, artist development strategies, and the entire relationship between labels and their talent. Kenny Gamble's final assessment of Billy Paul as a madman was actually the highest compliment he could have given. In an industry full of calculated moves and careful compromises, Paul had remained genuinely unpredictable until the end. He'd rather fail on his own terms than succeed on anyone else's. This philosophy became his greatest weapon and his most enduring legacy. When Billy Paul passed away, the industry didn't just lose a great singer. They lost their most effective reminder that some people simply refused to be controlled. His legacy lives on not just in Me and Mrs. Jones, but in every artist who chooses artistic integrity over commercial success, who decides that respect is more valuable than money. The streets of North Philadelphia had produced many talented musicians, but only one who changed the entire power dynamic of the music industry. No one ever messed with Billy Paul again after they learned who they were really dealing with. And in an industry built on exploitation and control, that might be the most powerful legacy any artist could leave behind. His story continues to inspire artists who refuse to be broken by a system designed to crush their spirit and commodify their creativity. Anyway, that's it for this video, folks. Bye!